I want to talk about the power of your personal story. While I probably didn't consciously know this ever since I was a kid, and especially as a teenager and even in my collegiate years as well as in my young adulthood, I always felt it was really important to share yourself with others. And I would just do that naturally. I'm guessing a lot of you do that and not even overthinking about what exactly am I doing? I just know this works. I like to share my story with you, so that you might be able to benefit from my experience. And on the one hand, I want to be really clear about sharing ourselves. I actually despise, this is kind of a weird thing. I actually despise the expression, I know exactly how you feel, because technically I think that is an absolute impossibility. You cannot possibly know how I'm feeling and what I'm going through, even if you went through the exact same thing with all the exact same parameters, because all of us, we go through our lives with different upbringings, different biases, different belief templates, different support systems. And my coping mechanisms might be better than yours, or I might have other people that I can turn to, or I might want to go see a therapist who can talk me through it, or whatever. It's always different. You might be able to understand rationally that stinks, or wow, that's bad, or you're sick and you got cancer, or you just lost your job, or you got divorced, or whatever it might be. And I always feel like I won't say to you, I know exactly how you feel, because I won't ever know that. And it doesn't matter, even if we've gone through similar experiences. But the one thing that I do know is that I want to help you if you need help. And I know people's hearts are in the right place. And I won't beat anybody up for saying I know exactly how you feel, because it's not really, there's no ill intent there. But I want you to be mindful of that, because the goal in what I want to talk to you about today, in the lesson that we let out on Saturday, is really is sharing you so that others can benefit from your experience. Who gets what I'm saying here, right? We all have gone through struggles. In order to help somebody, you not only need to be able to understand them and understand what motivates them, but you need to know their story, at least to a certain degree, or you at least need to be able to appreciate that story exists and that you don't understand the story, and it also can come at it from that vantage point. But you know that there are people that get sick. You know there are people that get divorced. You know there are people that lose jobs. You know the people that miss out on promotions. You know that there are people that feel underpaid, whatever it is. And so I want you to just realize that. And the one thing that I wanted to kind of kick off the little here's how, or the how-tos today that I want to cover, the tips, let's say, is show of hands here, because I want to see this in the chat. Can I get a show of hands of anybody who if any of these is okay? Do you feel like you undervalue yourself, or do you or either any of the ors? Or do you feel like, geez, I don't really have a lot to offer? Like, what's so special about me? Or how about this one? Well, everybody knows that, right? Everybody knows that. And let's go backwards. Like, the canyon that you think exists between what you know and what the person in the next Zoom thing knows is microscopic. It's a dot. It's not the canyon you think it is. And why do we think this way? Why do we think that? Because we don't know what it's like not to know what we know. We don't think there's anything special about us, but we're used to knowing that. And that's what makes it really, really hard for us to be teachers to each other, is because we just assume people know what we know. The expert curse, that's excellent. I wouldn't use those terms, but that's exactly right. The curse of knowledge, I think I've heard things like that, right? And Liz, our perception shapes the lens we see through to understand the world around us. What I wrote one of my quotes the other day, a couple of weeks back, it was a month or two, about disagreements in your life generally have more to do with different experiences than they do anything else. Because my view of the world is different than your view of the world, right? I'm not disagreeing with you because I don't like you, although some of you might think that when you're disagreeing with somebody. So what I want to do here in point one is I want you to look at this. So undervalue, and this is where many of us are, and I'm guilty of it too. Sometimes I have to stop and say, I just need to make it a little more simple, thinking that everybody knows the base stuff, so we got to go to the expert level right away. But we tend to undervalue ourselves because we think about everything we've been through in relation to us. You think about you. I'm not saying you're selfish. I'm saying the reason you undervalue yourself, oftentimes, I do it too, is because we think about what we know in terms of the value to us. Does that make sense? Geez, that's no big deal to me. I do that every day. So the value isn't as high as me learning something new or being able to do something new. The real trick, the real tip, is attaching proper meaning to the experiences that you've been through and then thinking about the value for them, not you. So if I want to tell you the story, as I emailed all of you that I hope you read multiple times over yesterday on a Sunday, about when my boss called me into his office, my last corporate job, and gave me two options that I didn't like. So I shared with you what was the impetus, dare I say, kick in the pants, to finally start my own business, was a situation that on its surface on that Friday afternoon on November 19th in 2004 was practically coma-inducing. I mean, there's absolutely nothing special about me being called into the CEO's office and not giving good options, right? I bet a whole bunch of you have been fired before, or at least maybe are in a job you don't like, right? Except I have to look for what's the value in this situation that can help you or others. And the fact in that lesson, hope, if you haven't had a chance to read it, there's an email in your inbox from yesterday, as well as a video that I did a few years back on this subject. And I don't want to go through it because it's already out there. I'll talk to you about something else from my life today that I've never said before. And so I want you to think about that, right? Think about the value in relation to them. So it's looking back and attaching meaning. So I say, often you hear me say, experience is not what's happened to you, it's the meaning you attach to what's happened to you. So this is the important part. What did that do to me? It was a pivotal moment in my life that set me on a direction that created something that now you are all a part of, here we are now 20 years later. And I just can't get over how, I get happier every day with what I do. So think about that. All right. So that's the first thing, is we tend to undervalue ourselves. So we got to get over that. All right. Second thing is, now, when you are thinking about sharing yourself, it's the more traumatic the story, the deeper you dug, the deeper the hole, the harder it was to overcome. Usually the drama is very helpful because you had to fight through it, right? You often hear me say, well, no great story ever started with, so I got a scholarship to Harvard and then everything took off from there, right? And why has no great story ever started like that? Because it's like a gift. There was nothing, there was no struggle. There was nothing you had to work through. I don't care about that. And so, and not to mention, that story is totally unrelatable to all of us who didn't go to Harvard and get scholarships to go to school. I want to talk to the guy or the gal who couldn't get into any college but kept fighting. Or decided I couldn't get into college, so I just went and started a business. And now I'm a bajillionaire because I believed in myself. So I want you to think about, do this with me here. So one of the steps in sharing yourself is coming up with the story or stories that you want to share. And the power of your personal story is really the power of your personal stories with an S. And not only do you have multiple stories, but you have multiple versions of the same story. Because the incident that has caused me to go into recruitment, executive recruitment, the story itself is told differently to different people based on their goal, their objective, and what they need to understand or how they need to be inspired. So you could have the same story that has multiple versions or multiple vantage points, really. It's not different it's highlighting different details and spotlighting different things. So when you think about your defining moment, that's what I called it, a pivotal moment, a defining moment. Think about when you fought hard and had to overcome something. You could have been handed something, even if you were not in a pit, but were you handed something that was a big goal? That works too. Were you in a pit with something bad happening to you? That works better. But think about when you had to fight and think about how you overcame. Think about what you learned and what can be shared. So the story I emailed you about yesterday when I said the boss called me into his office, there were many lessons, right? One of the lessons was no matter how many options you're given, there are always more. You need to look for them. What was another lesson? If none of you know what I'm talking about, that's okay. Go back and read the message. But what's another option? He didn't have to lose for me to win, right? It was a win-win. So for those of you that don't know the story, my boss gave me like the 10-second version is I worked for a company. I was the vice president of business and product development. I made a lot of money. My boss called me in his office. I didn't realize this at the time. He was selling the company and he wanted to reduce my compensation because everything that I did generated money, but I had a salary that was attached to it and commissions that were attached to it was quite large. So what was happening is that was going to be a big hit on his cash flow projection, and he's trying to sell the company, which he actually did 5 months later. I didn't know that. He gave me a couple of options, and they were to take big pay cuts, and I was not about to do that. So what I ended up doing was I left that Friday, I went home, and I thought about opening up my own recruitment firm, even though I'd never recruited a day in my life. I went back to him on Monday, and I said, you could be my first client. I'll recruit for you. There's a lot of problems with the head count and all that good stuff, and I gave this to you in a story, and packaged it in an email, and I also put it on a video for you. So I want you to think about, well, what are the shareable moments in what you're going through? Many of you that are job searching right now, what are you learning? You're learning skills. You're learning the value of a network. You're learning not to take things for granted. You're learning a lot of things that are teachable moments. And you might think, well, no one's really going to care. An awful lot of you are going to go and you're going to find your job and then you're just going to start working and you're going to forget. You're going to lose that perspective and you're not going to keep up with your network and you're going to slip back into those bad habits when one of the greatest things you can do is be a giver to others who are now in the situation you were once in. It's just an example. Some of you might have been sick and can share the how you got support, how you emotionally got through it. Those kinds of things. Okay? So think about your moment. Please share. I'd love to hear some of your moments. You don't even have to go into the whole story, but just has your moment popped into your head? Let me share a story with you. I was thinking about what I wanted to tell you today, and there are these notes. I don't think I have them here. So one of the things that I did when I was writing the Zebra Code was I was brainstorming about stories that should go in the book. And I didn't put this one in the book, although I probably should have, but I didn't. And it's okay. The book is perfect the way it is. It's not a perfect book. It's just perfect the way it is because life is perfect. And so I was about 24 years old at this time, and I was working at Anderson Consulting, which is now Accenture. And I had been working at this client, Amoco, which is a large oil company. Many of you have probably filled up your gas tanks, or British Petroleum. It's all together now. Maybe it was Amoco, then British Petroleum bought it. Now they've split brands, whatever. I'm working at a large oil company. And I had been working there off and on for a couple of years. I had worked there for 4 or 5 months. I left. I went to work at McDonnell Douglas, where I worked on building the Tomahawk and the Harpoon missile for the first Persian Gulf War. That made me sick. And I was back at Amoco, and I had been there for a little while. And one of my jobs was to evaluate the entire world's worth of gas stations that were Amoco. Everything from a gas station to a Stop and Shop, car wash, you name it. And I was working with their purchasing department, and the manager of the purchasing department was complaining to his bosses that he felt that this global purchasing department basically purchased everything, everything. But we were looking at service stations in particular, and there were a lot of people that worked in this unit, and they had asked my company to come in and evaluate the organizational structure, the processes themselves, to determine what the optimal staff was. So I'm about 24 years old. Maybe I was almost 25 at this point. So I had 6 weeks to evaluate it, and I did. I interviewed everybody. I mean, I did everything. I looked at the systems. I looked at them. I looked at how many steps there were between their desk and the Xerox machine. I mean, I looked at everything. So I write this report up, and I'm about to meet with my immediate boss and one of my client bosses. And I remember I had sent this, the document, which was the write-up of basically everything I did, the research I did, the conclusions I drew, why I drew them. And we were going to need to tell the boss that not only was he overstaffed, or not understaffed, and he wanted to hire people. I'm like, you need to lose people. Like you got dead weight here. You're blowing hundreds of thousands of dollars in staffing costs that you don't need. So now obviously he's not going to like that. And that isn't even the moral of the story, but that's the scenario. That's the exposition, so to speak. That's the setting. And so I go to sit down with my boss and my client, and I was feeling pretty good about the conclusions because I knew this was rock solid engineering work. Like, these processes were going to be re-engineered. This organization was going to be restructured, and I was going to save them not just the personnel cost, but millions and millions of dollars in vendor fees and everything that they were doing. Nothing was centralized. They weren't getting the best rates. They were spending millions of excess dollars. So I remember sitting down, and the first thing my boss and my client, they look at each other, and then they look at me and they say to me, Andy, okay, just so you're prepared, we might be a little aggressive with you on this doc. Like, I'm thinking, who starts a conversation like that? Right? I'm thinking to myself, now what do you think I'm thinking? Uh-oh. They said, my boss looks at me and says, the conclusions are solid. This is really good research and work, but the writing sucks. Your writing's terrible. Now, had I known at that time that I was going to be a 4-time publisher, best-selling, award-winning author, I would have probably shot it back to him. But I didn't know that at the time, and I just took his words at face value. Who's ever gotten feedback like that? Now, I want you to imagine what's going through my head. Like, it's a long document. Not to mention I have to give a presentation and all that stuff. Now, I was an electrical engineering student. I took an English class in college because I had needed an elective or two. But, writing wasn't my strong point. I was developing software, and if you wanted to talk to me in if-then COBOL statements, I probably could have managed pretty well. Right? You get what I mean? Like, bang, right between the eyes. So what I did was I said, well, okay, well, how do I get better? Like, all right, that's fine. Fine. How do I get better? What do you want me to do? I'll restructure this or whatever. My boss says, I got to send you to writing school. I said, well, okay, well, we got some of that in the company, right? He says, right. He said, I need you to go. You got to spend like 3 days. They got to teach you how to write. So I go to this 3-day class. I'm learning about fog factor, motor to weight ratios. I'm learning about sentence structure. This is not the kind of stuff they teach it in punctuation and grammar. This is like how you write with force and emotion and streamline in as few words as possible and so on. It's 3 days, all day. You're practicing. They're grading your stuff. I mean, this was like, I was like, ah. And okay, so I'm say 24, 25. All right, so off I go. I make the presentation to the big guy, and I go to him, and that's a little bit of a side of the story, because the point is that I took his feedback to heart. I didn't my reaction wasn't at all, oh, well, if you don't think I can write, I'll show you. That's silly, because that's emotion you don't need, right? If you're motivated by something someone else said in a negative manner, meaning you're not inspired, but you're doing it to prove them wrong, that's energy you don't need to be spending, not to mention it's external motivation, which is going to wane. What I looked at was I thought about, I need to get into this writing class right away, because in order for me to grow and become a better consultant, I'm going to need to be a better communicator. And so my focal point wasn't on the feedback as much as it was, what's the next step? And what's the next step going to do for me? And what ended up happening, long story long, I guess, is about 5 years later. So let's say this was 1996. 5 years later, I worked on a project for another arm of Amoco, an entire company called Amoco Pipeline. And I went and investigated other oil companies like Chevron, Texaco, Shell, Chevron, these other oil companies, Mobil, and we were evaluating how to rebuild all of the systems that Amoco Pipeline used to manage the entire company. So all the pipelines itself, but all the logistics, all the movement of the oil, all the accounting, the inventory management, all the refinery stuff, everything was going to be completely blown up and redone. So I went off to evaluate this, and I looked at, well, how am I going to put this in context for these individuals? And this needs to be pitched to the president of the company, literally the top guy. And the board is going to look at this, and my client was going to present our findings. I wrote a 50-page document, and I'm sitting in the board meeting while my client is presenting this to these guys. And the president looks at him and says, "Thank you, Dean. By the way, this document, I've been working for 40 years. I have never seen a document this great from an IT department ever, as far as the business savvy, the ability to draw conclusions, the rationale, the prose itself." And of course, my client said, "Thank you." He didn't say anything to me, but I was there to hear it. And you can't take that away from me. So my point is that anything that comes along in your life, if it matters to you and you want to focus your energy on it, that your ability to be successful will have a lot more to do with where you place your attention than your actual ability. Because my ability at that time was none. I had no skills. I had no writing skills. I mean, I had written papers, but that's to get a grade in college. And I probably wrote some stuff, for my company, like requirements documents, but that really wasn't going to win any prizes. You get what I'm saying? So I want you to imagine, look at the effect. Look at how long ago that was, and how far I've come as the guy you know. But if there's anything about you and your life that you want to do, I would encourage you, no matter what the feedback is or whether somebody doesn't think you're good enough, I'm telling you, you are good enough. And it's just a matter of if that's going to be pivotal to your success. Writing was going to be pivotal to my success no matter what I did. I didn't know I was going to write books. I was 24 years old. I didn't know anything, right? I was just trying to get through the assignment. So anyway, now let's take my story. Today I heard him say fog factor. Fog factor, you don't know what that is. I want you to think about your motor to weight ratio is, do you have a verb to noun configuration? So a lot of people use a lot of extra words, but does somebody understand what's actually happening in the sentence? That's a verb-noun combo, and the higher the verb ratio to the noun ratio is, your motor's faster. They're going to read it faster. It's going to register faster. It's going to have more emotion. You're not going to bog them down. And so the fog factor is a metric that looks at the number of words it takes you to basically make the point. Does that make sense? I know these things, I've never forgotten them. And I just channel them into everything I do. My email copywriting is different than my blog copywriting, is different than my book copywriting or my workbook copywriting. They're all different. So everything has a purpose. I'll do a session on it. All right, but let's talk about these things. Now, I don't want to go through this too quickly, or sorry, too much, but I gave you off of Gustav Freitag's dramatic writing techniques, basically the plots for anything dramatic, where you have the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and then either the catastrophe or the denouement. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I covered this in the lesson. But what I did from the backbone of that dramatic storytelling formula is I created my own version for you, so that when you're creating a story that you're sharing with someone, some of you I know are on the interviewing side, and you follow my interviewing techniques, and you hear me talk about the CAR technique, where you got context, and then you got a formula, and then you got the specifics, and then you got the result. Well, this is when you're sharing stories of any kind. There's these 7 steps. There's a setting. I was working on an assignment for Amoco. I was reorganizing the global purchasing department, their processes, and their headcount, their organizational structure. I went to turn in my paper, and my boss and my client said, Andy, your writing stinks. That's the incident. Then the buildup. Okay, you need to go to writing school. Then the peak. I went to writing school. I made it my mission in life to become a good communicator in the written form. What ended up happening? I recreated the package. I wrote a bunch of other good stuff. I became a brilliant writer. I wrote a document that was pitched to the president of the Amoco pipeline, among other documents. I sold a whole billions and zillions of dollars to that client. What's the lesson? Right? Kind of thing. Do you see these things? This is all in your workbook. It's all in your workbook. And for those of you that need to keep notes, it's also, let's see, where is it? It's also on page 197 in the ZEBRA code. So all this stuff is in there, but this is the formula. This is the formula that you can use. And then I want to cap this off with a couple of other items here. Just really just one biggie is, when you think about sharing anything with anybody. So I have to do what I'm about to show you. I do this every single week. I do this every single Thursday. I do this every single month with those of you that are in the leadership program. I do this today with you in this book club. But in order to make your story valuable, you need to go through these 5 things. Number 1 is about you. What's the goal of the story? My goal is to teach you. This way is to teach you a lesson. Some of you, your goal might be, I want to have a story brand. I want to better market my company. Some of you might be, no, I need to relate to the client so that they buy our goods and services. Some of you might be, no, I need to tell my friend a story to cheer her up. Okay? So you've got your goal. Will your story bond you to them? So I got a scholarship to Harvard. It's not bond worthy. You're just going to be annoying to most people. Right? You follow that? So how is what I'm going to tell them going to help me bond? Well, when I wrote you that email, the one I sent yesterday about getting right? Given a couple options, which was an essential firing. Well, is that not going to bond me to a lot of people who've been through that? Is that not going to bond me to a job searcher, right? You're tracking. And then, but I also need to know what motivates you. Because in order to bond with you, the best bonding is done through your motivation, not mine. When I show up every Thursday, yes, it's nice that you know I have stuff to buy because I have a business to run. But my motivation is to teach you. My motivation is to spread the good word. My motivation is to help people who need career development and job searching help. My motivation is also to build trust with you. My other motivation is to market my services as well. Sometimes I'm all out selling, right? You get the idea, but I need to know what motivates you. So when I do any of those things, I need to understand what's going to motivate you. And then, is it actually in a story? So you got to wrap it together. Why? Well, number one, stories are more entertaining. Number two, stories are more memorable. That's easier for you to remember it. And then I want to cap it off with this last piece. I think I messed up there a little bit. Can the listener imagine, or can they see their potential transformation? Can you move their attention from the present and get them to imagine a better future? Can you get them to imagine it's going to be okay? Can you get them to imagine, I can do that? I can do that. That's what makes the story win. And if you don't go, well, let's say 4 for 4, you're not going to win. You're not going to win that story. You got to touch through 2 through 5. The goal is really for you. That's because it makes the story valuable for you as well. The value in my story could be, I helped you. That could be the value that all I care about. Sometimes, most times. Okay. This is a great question. Is it Devon Woodard? Without knowing the audience, how do you quickly assess if there's a bond or their motivation? You're going to have to speculate. Now, I would say 100% of the time, if you're going to go to the expense of sharing a story like this, you're going to have some inkling as to why you're sharing it. Right? Is that not a safe assumption? If you're going to tell a story like I told with, Mike and Ben, the two guys, right? I know there's going to be value in that. And I can speculate based on the audience. Like, I know every Thursday, the kind of people who show up are either looking for a job, looking for a new career. They're looking for development to accelerate their career. They're looking for something on what I teach. So that I do know. So you're usually able to do that pretty well. If your friend needs you to, right, they're bending your ear and you're going to share a story, it's a pick-me-up of some kind. So that's a great question. All right. So I hope you enjoyed this portion of this.